In this video, we are going to see the main features of PHP from its 5.6 version that got out in 2014 until its 8.3 version that got out in November 2023. I'm going to expose only the main features of each PHP version, as there will be videos that will detail for each version both the backward and compatible changes and the new features with code samples, etc. So in this video, we are going to see quickly the PHP timeline, and then in next videos we are going to see in details those features that we are going to expose. Alright, let's get started. PHP 5.6 Variadic functions. This version of PHP came with support for variadic functions. Gone are the days when we have to use func getArgs, which is a function that we have to use if you want to have a variable number of arguments. We have now just to use 3 dot syntax for our argument, and it will then be available for us as an array. The same syntax, 3 dots before variable name, used in a function call context, will result as unpacking the array or transversable into arguments. That's what we call argument unpacking. And the third feature is the extended use for functions and consts. In PHP 5.6, we can use the use keyword for both classes, functions, and consts. For functions and consts, we can use the syntax use const and use function. In December 2015, PHP 7.0 got out. One of PHP's 7 main feature is scalar type hints. Scalar type hints got introduced in PHP 7.0. We previously could hint only variables of type objects. Now we can type hint integer, floats, strings, etc. The second feature is return types. In PHP 7.0, we can now define a return type for a function. If this return type is not respected, PHP will throw an error. And the third feature is anonymous classes, and this feature is particularly useful if you want to use a class only once. You don't have to define a class for that in a separate file, etc. So you just could now use this anonymous class, define it on the fly, and use it directly, which is pretty handy. In December 2016, PHP 7.1 got out with some cool features like nullable types. Now in PHP 7.1, if we prepend a question mark to a type, it will be marked as nullable. A variable or a return type of type question mark int, for example, will be either int or null. The second feature is the introduction of a new iterable pseudotype. This pseudotype is a marker for a variable that is either an array or an object that implements traversable. So if you have an argument of type either object implementing traversable or an array, you can now mark it with the iterable pseudotype. Finally, if you have catched exceptions in try catch and did the same execution for multiple catches, you can now avoid that by catching those multiple exceptions in the same block. In November 2017, we got the release of 7.2, almost a year after, with some new features like object type hinting. Object can now be used as parameters type hinting and function return type. While this might not be very useful for developers, it's handy for libraries like Doctrine, where they consume and produce arbitrary objects. Abstract methods are now possible to override by another abstract class with the condition of respecting Liskov substitution principle, or LSP for short, which means we should be maintaining contravarious for parameters and covarious for return types. And that's what we call abstract method overriding that came in PHP 7.2. In the same context, when we extend a class or implement an interface and override a function with typed parameter, we can now omit the type hinting of the parameters in the child class. This change is done in order to ease the introduction of typed parameters in library, and that's what we call parameter type widening. Alright, now let's move on to 7.3, which got released in December 2018. The first new feature is a flexible heridocs. A lot of PHP developers avoid using heridoc and nodoc syntax. That explains why so many don't know them. What makes heridoc syntax painful is those two rules. The first rule is the closing marker for docstring is required to be followed by a semicolon or a new line. The second rule is the closing marker could not be indented. Those two rules make your PHP code looks very ugly. That's why a lot of developers don't use that. In PHP 7.3, good news, those two rules got removed. The second feature is trailing comma allowed in method calls. Allowing trailing comma is becoming a trend. They are allowed in arrays, grouped namespace. Now they are allowed in function calls as well. The goal is make appending items as easy as possible and readable, especially in Git. The third feature is a bunch of helper functions like isCountable, like array k first and array k last. Those helper functions got added in this version and they are very handy indeed. In November 2019 we got the release of PHP 7.4 with its new typed properties feature. Typing has become a thing in PHP. That's why after typing arguments, return types, we now have typed properties. Arrow functions are here, yay! PHP is catching up on this comparing to other programming languages. It's not a big deal, but for one line function, this could be more efficient. An interesting operator got introduced in PHP 7.4 that we can use to avoid writing a lot of code is the null coalescing assignment operator. So now instead of having this expression, foo will be assigned to either foo or bar, we are going to have this new expression with the null coalescing assignment operator, foo double question marks equals bar. PHP 8.0 got released in November 2020, which is a new major version of PHP. We can now have a function parameter or a return type returns a union of two types or more. This feature was well expected since the introduction of typing for parameters and function return types. Another interesting feature that will make the code way more concise and readable is named arguments. We can now call a function with any order of arguments and omit the default values as long as we precede the argument with its name and a colon. Attributes are now the official replacement of annotations. Thank you, Doctrine. Your amazing Doctrine annotation library might now go slowly to retirement. I will go for another interesting feature, although I promised 3 features per version, but I love this one. It's called constructor property promotion. Instead of declaring properties with the class, we do it simply within the constructor itself. Thanks to this feature, a code like this will be simplified to this. We simply have to declare the visibility in the construct parameters and voila, PHP will handle the rest for us, which is amazing. PHP 8.1 got released in November 2021. Enumerations are finally here. No more external libraries to support enumerations. They are native now. We can now have types as intersection of multiple types. Say you have a countable iterator variable. This variable can be of type transversable and countable. Read-only properties got introduced in this version of PHP. A read-only property is a property that cannot be modified after its initialization. They are handy for enforcing the immutability of an object. That's for PHP 8.1. PHP 8.2 got released in December 2022 with an interesting set of features as well. The read-only feature was so good that is now available for classes as well. Instead of making all properties of class read-only, we can set it at the class level and we are done. Dynamic properties are not allowed in read-only classes. True, false, and null are now types, so a function can now return true instead of a boolean. You might say, what's the use of that? An example would be isAdmin in a user class. IsAdmin for a simple user class will always be false, so we are going to return false by default instead of returning boolean. Whereas if we have an admin user class, then isAdmin would be true instead of false. A new attribute that will make you write more secure code is the sensitive parameter attribute. It's a way of telling PHP to redact a usually sensitive variable when displayed in a stack trace, exception stack trace, for example, in a log file. Finally, the PHP 8.3, the most recent version, got released on November 2023 with some amendments to read-only. Some amendments have been made to read-only features. Anonymous classes may now be marked as read-only, and read-only properties can be reinitialized during cloning. Those are some of the problems that got discovered after the read-only feature got introduced, and they are now fixed in PHP 8.3. Class constants now can be typed. This type has been respected in child classes, otherwise we are going to have an error. The override attribute got introduced, and it is now available to check that a method exists in a parent class or implemented interface. The next version of PHP would be 8.4, which will be released probably in 2024. This version is not released yet, but we know that there are some RFCs that are accepted and implemented, like parsing request body for non-post requests and adding rounding modes to round function. So this is a very brief history of the last 10 years of PHP. We are going to see each of these features in details with code samples in the next videos to come. So stay tuned.